It begins with the door inside the royal residence finally creaking open. A door that had been locked, guarded, and whispered about for years. And behind it, according to insiders close to the institution, something monumental has just been approved. Not a warning, not a temporary decision, but a final directive, one that is about to redraw the future of two royal children forever. For years, the public wondered if the institution would ever address the situation. People watched, speculated, whispered, and theorized. But the palace stayed silent, stone silent. And that silence became its own riddle. Until now. Because the institution, built on centuries of protocol, hierarchy, and ironclad tradition, has quietly moved to erase two young heirs from its official framework. No ceremonial recognition. No honorary roles. No place in the historic order. Not even a symbolic footnote in the records that define the lineage. And here's the part that sends chills down the spine. They didn't announce it on television. No press briefing, no statement, no royal fanfare. Nothing. They simply filed the decision. Coldly. Quietly. Finally. Why? Because to the institution, this isn't emotion. It isn't personal. It isn't revenge. It's one thing. And one thing only. To understand why the Crown acted now and why this decision is permanent, we have to go back more than a century to a king whose choices shaped the royal family's identity and set rules that still control the bloodline today. That's where the real story begins. To understand what happened with Archie and Lilibet, we need to step into the year 1917. The world was at war. Empires were falling. Kings were trying to hold their nations together. And inside Buckingham Palace, King George V made a decision that would echo through the next 100 years. He signed the Letters Patent of 1917, a strict set of royal rules that even modern royals must follow. These rules answer one key question: who is officially royal? Not who feels royal. Not who is popular. Not who has a famous parent. Only those recognized by the crown as a prince or princess. King George V created 3 conditions that must be fulfilled with no exceptions. First, a proven royal bloodline. The child must come from the royal family in a way the crown accepts. Second, an official royal birth registration. The birth must be documented according to royal protocol, witnessed, verified, and placed in the royal records. Third, a Church of England christening. This is not just tradition. It is a legal and spiritual seal that connects the child to the monarchy. These rules were created to protect the crown from confusion, manipulation, and political complications. They were designed to guard the royal bloodline with absolute clarity. And for more than a century, the system worked. No shortcuts, no exceptions, no bending. Now fast forward to the present and to the children of Harry and Meghan. When palace officials looked at Archie and Lilibet, they weren't focused on drama, interviews, or public reactions. They were looking at one thing: a strict checklist. And according to people familiar with the process, that checklist showed issues that couldn't be ignored under the 1917 guidelines. This brings us to the first complication. A complication that began the moment Archie was born. Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor arrived in 2019. At first, everything seemed normal. Royal fans celebrated, news outlets made the announcement, and Harry and Meghan appeared before cameras, proudly holding their newborn. It looked like a classic royal moment. But behind the scenes, in the paperwork the palace watches most closely, something unusual happened. Archie's birth certificate, originally listing Meghan's full legal name, Rachel Meghan Markle, was later changed. Not updated, not corrected, but rewritten. Her full name was removed and replaced with Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. Birth certificates aren't branding choices, they're legal documents meant to stand permanently in the historical record. Meghan said she did not request the change and believed it was made by the palace. Palace aides disputed that. Both sides gave different explanations. Neither side shifted. And in that conflict, one thing entered the official record: uncertainty. Not gossip, not rumors, not speculation, just a sense of doubt surrounding a document that carries legal and symbolic weight. For the monarchy, doubt isn't a small inconvenience. It's something they prefer to avoid entirely. Any uncertainty in a royal child's documentation can feel like a small crack in the system itself. That quiet change to Archie's birth certificate became, for many observers, the first subtle sign that his place within the traditional royal framework might already be complicated. The moment that change was made, the clock began to tick. And by the time Lilibet was born, it appeared the palace had already taken a different direction, first stepping back, then stepping away, and eventually keeping its distance completely. When Lilibet Diana arrived in June 2021, many expected the familiar royal pattern. A palace statement, official confirmations, senior staff appearing before cameras, and the sense of ceremony that usually surrounds a new chapter in the Windsor story. But that didn't happen. Instead, the announcement came from California through a polished press release. There were no formal stages, no coordinated royal appearances, no traditional fanfare, only a brief acknowledgement from the palace and nothing more. It felt less like the birth of a royal child and more like a private moment for a private family. And in the context of the monarchy, that level of silence carried meaning. Royal births have historically been treated as national events, carefully recorded, witnessed, verified, and preserved for future generations to trace the lineage. But with Lilibet, the usual ceremonial structure appeared absent. No royal registrar, no traditional oversight, no British medical authorities involved in the documentation. To some, it signaled a shift. A quiet but unmistakable departure from the way things had always been done. The crown did not take ownership of the moment. And in royal language, silence can speak louder than any public statement. According to people familiar with palace operations, this was the point when insiders realized the institution had stepped quietly to the side. Without the monarchy's involvement in the earliest records of Lilibet's life, there was no traditional foundation, no official link that usually connects a newborn to royal history. It was unusual, something the modern palace had rarely, if ever, done. And in that quiet gap, the future took an unexpected turn. The question then became, what shifted the palace from cautious to completely hands-off? The answer appeared a few months later, during a ceremony that should have strengthened Lilibet's connection to royal tradition, but instead highlighted how far things had drifted. Months after Lilibet's birth, Meghan shared proudly that her daughter had been baptized in California. There were photos, loved ones present, and a warm family celebration. But inside palace circles, the reaction was different. Reports suggested that the Church of England, the institution historically tied to the monarchy, did not treat the ceremony as an official Anglican christening. And without that recognition, the royal system would have no formal record showing a spiritual link between the child and the crown. To the outside world, it may seem like a small detail. But in royal protocol, it carries weight. A royal christening is not just a religious moment, it's a formal marker that says, this child is part of the monarchy's tradition. Everything is normally done through a specific process: holy water from royal chapels, clergy connected to the Church of England, official witnesses, and documentation filed according to long-standing rules. None of those elements were part of the ceremony in California. There was no archbishop, no Church of England registrar, no royal oversight. And, because of that, the event didn't meet the tradition. Instead of strengthening her position, the ceremony did the opposite. It created distance, another space the crown could not bridge when it came to formally recognizing her place in tradition. It became a gap that no later interview, statement, or announcement could close. For the monarchy, this wasn't personal. It was procedural. A child not officially welcomed into the Church of England simply couldn't be rooted in the centuries-old structure that defines the royal system. 2 points of uncertainty now existed. One surrounding Archie's birth documentation, and one surrounding Lilibet's christening. And as those gaps grew, the foundation of Meghan's public image and her long-term narrative began to shift. To understand why the palace's decisions mattered so much, you must understand what Meghan built. From the moment she entered royal life, her identity evolved. She wasn't just Meghan Markle anymore. She became Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, a global figure associated with royal symbolism, prestige, and the role of a modern mother in a historic institution. Her interviews, documentaries, podcasts, book deals, photo shoots, and even her lifestyle brand, American Riviera Orchard, all carried a subtle sparkle of royalty. The image was powerful, a duchess living in California, raising children tied to one of the world's most famous families, a unique blend of Hollywood and monarchy. But that image relies on one thing: the royal connection being recognized. The titles holding weight. The institution affirming the lineage. Because without officially acknowledged royal heirs, the narrative changes. Instead of a modern royal navigating her own path, she becomes simply part of a high-profile celebrity couple in Montecito. Instead of a mother raising two young heirs to a historic lineage, she becomes a mother raising two private American children outside the royal structure. Instead of a duchess shaping a future dynasty, she becomes a former royal trying to hold on to an identity that feels further away each year. According to people close to the situation, Meghan understood this better than anyone. Her public image wasn't built on drama or interviews, it rested on heritage. And that heritage lived through Archie and Lilibet. Their titles, their status, their place in the royal story formed the backbone of the narrative she had built. It was the reason audiences watched, listened, and stayed interested. But as the palace moved in a direction that seemed to distance her children from traditional royal identity, that backbone weakened. The shine faded. The foundation shook. For Meghan, this wasn't about paperwork, it was about identity. And for the palace, it marked the beginning of a step they believed was necessary, even if painful. A step that would leave Harry feeling cornered and eventually separate the children from the formal royal structure. By the time concerns about Archie and Lilibet's status grew too large to ignore, Prince Harry felt something slipping, something deeper than a disagreement or a misunderstanding. People familiar with the private conversations say he began making calls late at night. Not angry calls. Not formal ones. Calls filled with worry. Harry, who had grown up in palace corridors, hearing the weight of tradition in every echo, now found himself on the outside, watching doors close behind him. And the part that hurt him most wasn't about losing anything for himself. It was the thought of his children losing something they never asked for, something he believed belonged to them by right of birth. According to those claims, Harry pleaded with the palace to reconsider. To look again. To leave a place for his children in the story, even if he no longer stood in it. He explained that stepping back from royal duties didn't mean stepping out of the bloodline. In his view, his children were still entitled to their PLA. But the palace's response, as described by those familiar with the situation, was not emotional or comforting. It wasn't warm or sympathetic. One aide reportedly told Harry in a calm, measured voice, "This is not about emotion. This is about order, lineage, and the future of the crown." For Harry, it felt like running into a wall of ice, cold, unmoving, impossible to shift. It was a reminder that the monarchy is larger than any one person, even a prince who once grew up inside its halls. And when Harry realized nothing he said would change the decision, something inside him seemed to give way. He wasn't just losing a disagreement. He felt like he was losing the legacy he had hoped to pass on to his children, a legacy growing quieter by the day. Then came the moment when the palace made its final, irreversible move. In royal life, the most powerful decisions are almost never delivered in dramatic speeches. They happen on paper, through meeting notes, signatures, and documents quietly approved behind closed doors. According to insiders, the Crown completed paperwork that formally distanced Archie and Lilibet from the traditional framework of royal identity. The language wasn't dramatic. It wasn't public. It was written exactly the way the palace prefers, quietly, confidently, permanently. The outcome was simple and severe in its clarity. No prince or princess titles. No ceremonial roles. No place in future royal duties. No inclusion in official records of active royal heirs. No position in the historical pages that preserve the royal line. The books where royal names are preserved for centuries would not list Archie or Lilibet as part of that continuing story, not as heirs, not as future royals, not as participants in the institution their father once belonged to. And unlike temporary decisions or paused privileges, this one was final. There were no appeals, no negotiations, no chance for last-minute changes. It was the palace's way of saying, these children are not part of our future plans. With a single signature, something happened that months of interviews, years of distance, and physical separation between families had never managed to achieve. The door closed completely. But how the palace closed that door is what reveals the real strategy. While Harry and Meghan spent years sharing their experiences through interviews, books, and documentaries, the palace followed a very different approach. It didn't argue. It didn't defend. It didn't respond point by point. Instead, it stayed silent. And in the world of royalty, silence is not weakness. It's a tactic, a shield, a way of letting the noise fade while waiting for the right moment to act. According to people familiar with palace thinking, the institution simply watched. It observed the interviews, the statements, the public discussions, without rushing, without reacting. The monarchy doesn't compete for public sympathy. It plays a long, generational game. And when the moment finally arrived, it made one precise, deliberate move. Not aimed at Meghan, not aimed at Harry, but at the core of their public identity, the royal status of their children. By removing that connection, the crown quietly took away the single element that made the couple's narrative feel tied to royalty. Without titles, there are no young heirs. Without heirs, there is no royal line continuing abroad. And without that line, there is no separate dynasty shaping its own version of the royal story. In royal circles, some interpreted this as one of the palace's most calculated decisions in years, a subtle correction, a tightening of boundaries, a reminder that only the monarchy decides who carries its legacy forward. Not the media, not sympathy, not celebrity power. Even a prince walking away didn't change anything. The palace didn't need to fight. It simply waited. One day, far in the future, someone will open the royal archives, those giant books that list every king, queen, prince, and princess. Books older than entire nations, books that hold 1,000 years of history. They'll flip the pages and see George, Charlotte, Louis, every Windsor child. But not Archie, not Lilibet. Because the monarchy made a clear, intentional choice, these two will not be written into our story. Archie and Lilibet will grow up in California, sunlight, backyard games, normal schools, everyday life. They'll know love, family, and freedom. But they will never stand on a royal balcony. Their names will never be announced with royal titles. Their portraits will never hang in Buckingham Palace. They will not appear in the books that outlast generations. Their story will live in California homes, not royal halls. And none of this is because of anything they did. It's because the crown believes legacy isn't shaped by emotion, fame, or interviews. Legacy is shaped by rules, lineage, and traditions that never bend. So Archie and Lilibet will be remembered as Harry and Meghan's children, but not as the crown's. And that silence, the silence of their names missing from the royal record, is louder than any interview, louder than any argument, louder than any scandal. It is final. It is permanent. It is the coldest move the palace has ever made. In the end, one truth remains: the monarchy never raises its voice. It doesn't have to. Its silence says everything.